Today's webinar, CFCI webinar, is on the subject of student housing. Very timely webinar on student housing, and we've titled this A New Future. We have three speakers today who are all going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to give you their views on student housing, both past, present and future. And we are then going to host our usual Q&A session at the end. So I'll be reminding you through the process to highlight your questions and answers, questions rather, in the little icon box in the Q&A box. So please don't forget to raise your questions. So if I just start with some introductions. So we have Andrew Percival, who's going to speak first. He's the MD of UPP Projects. And he looks after, believe it or not, some 36,000 student rooms. Wow, it's almost a small town. Anyway, Andrew's going to give us a very interesting and thought-provoking talk on his experience in the student housing scene and what he gets up to. So next then we have Andrew Drummond, who's going to give us a talk about what projects he's been working on and some of the research he's doing. Andrew is an associate at RHP Architects in Cambridge. I think he's also going to give us a case study as well. And then we're going to finish on Stuart Websdale. Stuart is domestic bursar at Jesus College. He heads up their operations, the operations for the college estate, and also deals with major projects as well. So a great lineup today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over straight away now to Andrew, who's going to give us the first talk. If I stop sharing, Andrew. And over to you. So if you set up your share screen, we've got about 75 people on the call today, which is good to see. Okay, Andrew, that's coming through. Yeah.
You got the presentation?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to talk today. As said, my name's Andrew Percival. I run UPP Projects Limited, which is I'm responsible for origination for UPP. A little bit about ourselves, assuming my screen will now change. There we go. We are the largest on-campus residential and academic accommodation provider in the infrastructure space in the UK. We have just over 35,000, close on 36,000 rooms in operation or under construction, all of which are through long-term bespoke partnerships with 15 leading universities. 900 employees providing frontline services, and since our inception in 1998, so over 20 years, we've invested £2.6 billion in the UK higher education sector, and we've provided a home to over 350,000 students. I thought it'd be useful just to explain a little bit about the student accommodation sector. It really is categorised into four key areas. You have the university owned, which I'm sure many are well aware of, which is predominantly on campus. There's often across the country been a challenge in the investment within that stock, and any investment or new stock made by universities is very much on balance sheet. So from a university perspective, that means sacrificing potentially the ability to provide academic facilities. So that has always been a challenge for the university sector. You then have the partnership model, which is very much based on an infrastructure style transaction, which is based on discounted cash flows. So at the end of the concession period, the asset reverts back to the university, but in the intervening period, the private sector, such as UPP, will be responsible for the design, build and operation of that asset and take the demand risk, making it an off-balance sheet transaction, leading that money to effectively be free for the university to spend elsewhere. You have the pure PBSA marketplace, where you've got the likes of Unite as the largest player in that space, which is really a refined property model based on property finance, very much direct let, traditionally based to students, but a great level of investment that has been going on in that space. And then the final sector is the HMO, houses of multiple occupation, which is your smaller landlords taking up perhaps small houses in university cities and letting them direct to students. So the area I'm really focusing on is those covered really by the partnership model and PBSA marketplace. The UK is the second largest market for PBSA outside of North America, and the UK sector is valued at about 50 billion. So it is a significant asset class now in its own right. What are the current characteristics? Very much a global marketplace with ideas and concepts coming from different countries influencing the offer in the UK, and we'll hear more about that, I think, from Andrew during the course of his presentation, and certainly probably during questions as well. UK universities have to compete with international rivals as well as domestic rivals for students, and so they need and recognise the importance of providing high quality student accommodation and facilities to try and provide them with a degree of competitive advantage in the marketplace. And from our perspective, we are confident in the ongoing demand for student accommodation, and I'll explain why in a second. So since the removal of student number controls, universities have grown significantly within the UK. Over 20 universities have increased their student numbers by more than 2,000 students. And you'll see there the largest growing universities picked out there, including UCL's significant growth in London. 25 universities have increased their postgraduate numbers by 33% or more since the introduction of postgraduate loans. And the government's international education strategy is seeking to increase participation from overseas and international students, increasing up to circa 600,000 by 2030 from 460,000 in 2019. So significant interventions in the UK HE market has driven a material growth in the number of students attending universities and therefore driving demand for accommodation. These two graphs, I think, show quite nicely where we are and where we are going. So the graph on the left shows how the number of acceptances and applicants has grown. Now that is against a demographic drop, as you'll see on the right-hand side. So the percentage of students going to university has been increasing significantly, really, since the reduction of the student number caps. We are now at the lowest point in terms of the number of 18-year-olds in the UK, and that is going to grow steadily through to 2030. So the student to bed ratio, that is often mentioned, is likely to increase, which demonstrates that the underlying demand for further accommodation is there. So how's the private sector responded? Well, over the last 5 years, really, the private sector has stepped in to fill the shortfall in accommodation. So without the private sector filling that void, universities would have been totally unable to meet the demand for that accommodation. As I mentioned earlier, to build accommodation, A, is expensive, but B, takes up a key part of their borrowing capability, which means it's much harder for them to invest in their required academic infrastructure. So the PBSA market now has grown significantly, whereas the university-led accommodation market, in terms of delivered by them, has grown by only 6% since 2014. And 87% of all beds are now provided by the private sector. So massive shift from where it was 10 to 15 years ago. Pre-COVID, 2020 was going to be this stellar year for the student accommodation market. The largest real estate transaction occurred at the beginning of the year with Blackstone's acquisition of IQ for 4.66 billion. Room bookings were significant in terms of at the start of the COVID outbreak, so as strong as they were. Pipeline for development activity was circa 20,000. And we've seen considerable consolidation into a few major players in the PBSA marketplace. So it really is becoming a very strong marketplace for the larger organisations. But it's facing a lot of challenges. The biggest one probably really being affordability. So there are widespread and significant concerns about the cost of student accommodation. But set against that, students are expecting more for their money, and they really see the quality of facilities as being a critical part of their choice. So balancing or trading off that quality of accommodation and service provision versus price is a real challenge now for the private sector. Certain cities have reached their saturation point as far as student accommodation is concerned, leaving older assets struggling and creating a significant fall in rents. So therefore helping the affordability, but making the business case for further investment much harder. The policy landscape has had a significant impact as well. So the draft London plan now requires PBSA providers to provide 35% of bedrooms in an affordable rent, which creates difficulties in terms of viability within Zone 1 and Zone 2 of London in particular. The Auger review still remains a significant legacy to be worked through. The balance between HE and FE provision still to be decided by government. The looming issue around the environment and carbon, how you tackle across the campus net carbon zero requirements as universities is becoming a big challenge. And as soon as they then start engaging on a more formal basis with the private sector, those assets should also be recorded within their carbon equations. COVID-19 has had a significant impact on the sector. Short-term impacts by university finances and what that then means going forward, we'll have to wait and see. How it's going to shift on the typology of rooms and the letting models. Again, we can maybe have some conversations around that later. And the impact on service offering. Having shared social spaces, communal facilities, how does that work in a post-COVID world? The industry has also been tarnished by poor delivery. So over 2,000 students faced significant disruption in 2019 with schemes being late. And that had a direct reputational impact on the universities, even if they had no control over the provision of that student accommodation because it was purely private sector led. Wellbeing of students has risen significantly up the agenda. Universities signing mental health charters, significant work by charities such as Student Minds to bring increased awareness of the impact of mental health on students. And research shows that in spite of COVID, where the potential for sort of studio living, etc., may be advantageous, the research shows that most students still prefer to live with their flatmates. And the final element really, which links to a lot of this, is construction costs, the increased cost of building of new build, linked to both meeting environmental requirements, but also just general construction inflation and the challenges of building in a post-COVID world will put pressure on schemes and therefore ultimately the affordability back to students in the first instance. So how is the private sector adapting the offer? Well, the product is always being reviewed. There'd been a significant shift away from shared facilities to en-suites, with most students, or the standard request really from students being an en-suite room, neither 6 ed or 8 or 10 bed clusters. There's a big question around the role of the studio and 1 bed flat. It was beginning to come out of favour a short while ago, but will that now shift with the post-COVID world where you can take full ownership of the environment in which you're living? The need to look at alcohol-free, quiet or single-sex accommodation again is students are becoming more discerning and requiring and demanding of the environment in which they wish to live. And as I said before, how do you solve the affordable question? We've got developers looking at micro rooms and all sorts of other options associated there to try and bring down the build cost to make rooms more affordable. The private sector is increasingly becoming engaged with the student community regarding the product, seeking feedback actively and not assuming that it knows best. We're seeing a big increase in the impact of brand for major players in the PBSA marketplace. So decisions such as Unite's to pay back some students their term 3 rent, obviously a decision that is made to sort of reinforce their position within the marketplace. We're also seeing a move to an increase in partnerships and nomination agreements with universities by the PBSA operators to try and mitigate occupancy risk. Greater focus on the service offering, without a doubt, and engaging with students throughout their journey from the point at which they choose their accommodation all the way through to which they leave. The increasing need to divest of suboptimal project stock by the major players. So that may be in the wrong location, it may be the build quality was poor, or the product typology is wrong. So you're seeing consolidation of portfolios and then subsequent disposal of those assets which are no longer performing. But ultimately, how is the private sector responding? That continual strive to provide new and innovative accommodation that enhances well-being, promotes social interaction and contributes positively to a student's overall university experience. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand back.
Super. Andrew, thank you very much. Some really useful numbers there for our audience to think about, and some interesting challenges and opportunities. Right, so we're going to hand over to Andrew Drummond now, who's going to take us through his slides. Andrew's going to take about 15 minutes to run through some of the stuff that RHP have been looking at, but also looking out further abroad at what other people are providing, and then finish on a case study. So Andrew, you're on mute, but over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you, Andrew. I've been in Cambridge for about 20 years, initially started working with colleges, and that inevitably drifted into looking at residential side of accommodation. And slides on here, many of which you're familiar with around Cambridge, and if you're not familiar with the image, you will be soon because it's not in Cambridge. So today, just following on from Andrew, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is based around the concept of affordability and based around conversations we've had with clients, particularly university clients, in the last 5 to 6 years. So I'm not going to talk about prefabrication. And I'm not, even though there's some lovely little kind of schemes being built at the moment. This is for Dyson Institute by Wilkinson Air, lovely piece of CLT, studio apartments, small scale. I'm not going to talk about passive house, or the fact that as architects we're as likely to be doing the graphs on the right as we are the pictures on the left, but we were doing these at the same time. But all of these things are happening, and they are relevant, and they are going to affect affordability for students, because they are generally going to increase construction costs, and how you manage that is a significant issue, not just in the student housing sector, but across all construction sectors really. So I could spend 15 minutes talking about all of those, so I'm not going to. I'm also not really going to talk about typology. There are still these 3 basic typologies being interpreted in different ways: the townhouse, the apartment, and the big building with one front door. And they still remain kind of prevalent across student housing and related sectors. So what I'm going to do is go through my top 10 questions, thoughts, provocations as to kind of what might be happening in the sector, and how other things that might impact on what we build and where we build, and how we go about maybe briefing for those buildings. So I'm going to start with number 10, which is actually before COVID, more students were choosing to stay at home. In 2018, 2019, 21% of students lived at home. That's affected by a number of factors, from whether they can afford accommodation, to cultural background, to just sort of lifestyle choices. But in a post-COVID world where lectures are moving online, will this actually increase? And what does that mean? We're seeing lots of people working at home, and people like Muji offering to subscribe you and rent you some furniture to be able to do that. Or at the other extreme, this little scheme in Sweden from 7 years ago now, looking at effectively the Home Office, the building a small building in the bottom of your garden. I'd quite like one, never mind being a student. Apparently they are available with installation as well. We'll gloss over that. So number 9, furniture. Pretty simple question really. Why are all rooms furnished? It costs money to put furniture in. I'll be honest, if you do the maths, you work out the payback, you can see why it goes in. But this is Tegan in Copenhagen, built 15 years ago now, 400 rooms, and the student rents the place unfurnished, 25 square meters, lots of built-in storage, but no desk, no bed, and the ability for a student to personalise the space, and the idea that students can and want to personalise the space, and the link back to well-being and affordability are kind of quite an interesting mix. Beyond that, you start to think, a real conversation with a client we had, which is where do students work, and what is the nature of furniture in a bedroom? And yeah, a lot of them just work in Starbucks. What is the importance of the desk in today's society? So 2 schemes that we've done, which kind of explain the differences, and the differences are who you're targeting. So on the left, Swells Court, which is postgraduate housing. Postgrads, particularly in Cambridge, spend a lot of time working at their desk as well as working in the department. They spend a lot of time working. We put in more linear meterage of shelving for a Cambridge student than we do for any other student or any other university. But on the right, this is Warwick University, and a room aimed at first years. And they're as likely to be working sitting on the bed, or working sitting in Starbucks, or the library, or sitting in the garden, as they are to be sitting at the desk. So genuine conversation, do we put desks in rooms, and who are they for? Conclusion was we did put one in, but it was actually for the parents, not for the student. Because if banker mum and dad are paying for that first year student, they want to be able to see that there's somewhere physically they're going to work, whether that's true or not. But the furniture, the nature of furniture, I think might evolve as the nature of study evolves. So 8, adaptability. Why is accommodation so bespoke? Andrew talked about organisations sort of dropping some of their older student accommodation, less appropriate student accommodation. It's become, student accommodation has become a very bespoke fit. And actually, is that true? Should there be more crossover with other types of housing? Or should we be building, housing for student, which is actually housing? So this is a scheme for developing a typology that suits it's a 6-bed house for students, but it's also a large 3-bed family house, or it's subdividable with different kind of things going on it with minimal work and minimal effort. It really reflects the private sector market where particularly 2nd and 3rd year students, they go out and they rent a big house together with their friends. Why not build them in the first place? Item 7, outside. We spend a lot of time thinking about the bedroom, thinking about the kitchen, thinking about the social spaces. The amount of social spaces is increasing inside the building. But so going back, that leave some cash for the landscape is my last landscape architect's initial words on day 1 of the project. Sometimes you get the benefit. This is some slides from work at Warwick University where we've deliberately chosen a site with an 11-metre hill and 300 trees on it, partly to make our life difficult, but also partly to have this ready-made landscape that we don't need to pay for, but using it to create spaces within that are not just about nice planting and stuff that's good to look at while you're working, which is all important in terms of well-being, but also usable spaces, whether it's the allotments in Seattle or nice bits of seating at Berkeley or hammocks in Amsterdam. I think the DJ decks are actually part of the Unite scheme somewhere. If you continue that thought about outside, on a lot of European schemes, the circulation's pushed to the outside. So rather than building into lots of internal corridors, can often be cheaper to put it on the outside. It's in Barcelona. Same thing's been happening in Paris, but a lot in the last 10 years. It's happening in Cambridge with postdoc housing at Eddington. A good percentage of it is deck access for good financial reasons. But in student housing, still quite rare. There's a few schemes in Edinburgh, but still quite rare. Food and eating. This was came to us as a brief, which is universities looking at centralised catering and catered halls. And this was the university deliberately thinking this was an answer to reducing rent levels. So you take all the kitchens out of all of the buildings and you build one catered hall. And students pay for the food, or they pay for it on subscription with their rent. I think there's one in York, there's 1 or 2 others, but still not that popular. Looking at a slightly different way, there's some social benefits in bringing all of that stuff together, and that was 500 rooms. This was a discussion with Cambridge College looking at specifically for postgrad students. If you've got 8 postgrad students sharing an apartment, they spend a lot of time working, they spend a lot of time in the departments, some are linked to other universities or to workplaces outside of Cambridge. So there's a fair chance that when one of them goes to the kitchen, they're probably the only person in it. So what if it's not 8 people sharing a kitchen? What if it's 30 people sharing a kitchen? And there's more chance that 3, 4, 5 of them will meet at once, and you have someone to talk to and someone to connect with. If you think 30 people sharing a kitchen is slightly mad, then probably you don't want to go to Edinburgh where 472 students share a kitchen. Well, they share about 80 kitchens in one big room. Imagine a motorway service station where you have to cook for yourself. I'll say this is a bit of a one-off, but I was pointed towards this by another client who was quite interested in it. So it's an interesting model. Some of the sort of same issues. This works a little bit like Cambridge colleges in that they have little pantries, which are a bit like Cambridge gyms. So if you want to just make some cornflakes or use a microwave, there's somewhere near your room, but the majority of stuff happens in this space. Then look at crossovers with student housing. Co-living is in many ways student housing for grown-ups. If you look at the collective, initially in Old Oaks, they've now got one in Canary Wharf and a couple of others under development. It's, you look at the plan, it's packed with rooms, small spaces. They do have a bit of shared facility, but then the main reason you kind of go there is the sort of social life that comes with it, social spaces that get provided. Young professionals are paying a premium to live here compared to living in the street next door, but they're buying into this sort of lifestyle and culture. The crossover with student housing, that kind of, this does look a bit like high-end student housing. The crossover that kind of interesting is the rental model, where students having to pay, initially, I paid by the term. Students are now being asked to pay 40, 50-week lets. Partly as the conference market is falling, they're saying keep students in the rooms, keep the money coming in. But at the same time, post-COVID lectures going online, post-grads, post-docs, again, they're not spending all year on campus. They're not needing to be on campus the whole time. So the ability to have some link back to campus and have some accommodation on campus when they need to be, maybe the whole rental model becomes slightly different. The collective at Canary Wharf, you can now book by a night. Old Oak, you have to book 3 months, 3 or 4 months at a time. But is there kind of more flexibility needed in those kind of models?
Andrew, 10 minutes.
Thank you. Students as marketing executives. If you build really good student housing that students are really into, whether it's to do with the architecture, the interior design, or it's the quality of the service, they are going to post, whether it's Instagram or Twitter, or there's a great website called studentroom.co.uk that we use to research projects. They will become your marketing. They will help you get students next year. Equally, if you design really bad student housing, they're going to do the same thing, but it's not going to help you get students next year. So, savvy developers, this is the student hotel, which is kind of the involvement of those co-living things in student terms. Quite savvy to that, and I think it's quite an important area to kind of think about. 3, community. Those co-living things, the Old Oak one in particular, really good example of how you build a giant spaceship, everyone lives in it, and it ignores the surroundings completely. If you're building these communal spaces and shared spaces, how do they relate to their surroundings? It's not just about architecture fitting in, but can the community come and use some of those spaces? And actually, almost ultimately part of your business plan to help pay for them. And 2 final ones: life, intergenerational living. We build student housing, we build young professional housing in co-living form, we build old people's housing, we build all of these sort of segregated things. Should there be more crossover? If you physically look at some of the buildings that accommodate these needs, the only difference really is marketing. But there's some interesting schemes in Holland, and there's stories from Google employees moving into an old people's home in California. But do we need to think more about creating kind of crossovers and creating buildings that can adapt more? And final one of the 10, a lot of the student housing we have is already built. A lot of the student housing we're going to be using in the next 10 or 20 years is already built. We've been through a cycle of looking at 1960s, 1970s buildings and reinventing them for today's world. Spatially, that was quite easy. They're big rooms, putting en suites in, good. Might need to look after the structure. But looking after 1990s PBSA accommodation, 1980s, you've got 14 square metre rooms with en suites, probably precast concrete en suites, no shared accommodation. What do you do with those buildings? They probably don't look great in terms of image either. So an interesting kind of challenge moving that forward. So final bit section. we've been working with the University of Warwick for about 6 years now and building 800 rooms. We've handed over the first 2 phases. And it picks up a number of these themes and conversations we've had with them. This scheme started with a survey of 2,000 students. They have 6,000 students on site, asking them what they wanted, what they needed. And you know, we are letting, thank Andy Guttercat for his Instagram images of their branding. But we've been looking at, we've done the architecture, the interior design, furniture design, the branding and the signage. And we did design some of the duvet covers, which is an interesting opportunity. But it is sustainable. It does use prefabricated stuff. It's very low budget. And the main thing is what we've been trying to do is create a neighbourhood. So not thinking about, not building 1,000 rooms that are identical, and thinking about the site in relation to existing accommodation on campus, both internal spaces and green spaces, to create something which is actually diverse. So we're building 14 buildings and we've got 4 primary different rent levels at the moment. These are this year's rents, with different rental periods as well. So trying to address affordability and diversity and through the budget and the price that we can charge people. But then looking at the rooms, we're looking at interior design, different themes, different room types and different room layouts, even though every room is 12 square meters. They all feel very different. So you can have a pop art inspired room with its pop art inspired kitchen. These are aimed at first year students. They're in a 12-bed townhouse format. Alternatively, if you're a postgrad, they're 8-bed cluster apartments, 2 different blocks, 2 slightly different themes, very different layouts. We're currently building 6-bedroom houses which are 2-story blocks with deck access. And these are aimed at students living off campus, wanting to come back, and they rent it as a house. They don't rent individual rooms. An industrial theme follows through to the central building, which is the village hall, which has all of the post, laundry, informal study space, the obligatory cinema room, music practice, meeting rooms, study rooms, and an actual village hall on the top floor. And that is my time. So,
super. Andrew, thank you very much. There's some really, really interesting, I like your 10 thoughts there, and the idea of 472 students sharing a kitchen, I think horrifies probably some people. But Andrew, super, thank you. There's some questions coming in the Q&A panel. Please can you raise any Q&A that you have, and I'll put those to our speakers at the end of this. Now we're going to hand over to Stuart Websdale, who's going to talk to us about some of his experiences at Jesus College and what they're doing at Jesus College this year. Over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Simon, and both Andrews. A really interesting start, and good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be with you virtually. So I'm going to drill down a bit more to the nitty-gritty, I guess, of what it's like in the heart of a college, as opposed to designing, but also talking about the relationship our students have with our buildings and our facilities, and a bit more of a focus on the impact of the existing pandemic that we're all battling with and are tired of talking about. So a little bit of context. Here we go. Jesus College overall, roughly, you can see this, 500 thereabouts postgrads, another 500 undergrads, plus fellows and staff. So quite a robust community, and we're all here to provide the best environment we can in terms of the staffing, to provide the best space for our students to learn, to be their best. So yes, we provide a roof over their heads, but there's the welfare, there's the catering, there's the physical working environments for the team, and study spaces and teaching spaces, and boring things like laundries and utility rooms. But if you get those wrong, you certainly hear about it. Library, which is never stocked with enough books, no matter how many are there, as well as the usual obligatory safety, security, and just general well-being. In addition to our academic function, we also generate income from conferences, from weddings, events, and B&B accommodation. So building bedrooms that work for students of different ages, different backgrounds, including financial, is a bit of a challenge. So a bit of a delay. Okay, so in terms of our architecture, we've got quite a diverse range, from 500+ year old to new builds, from shared bathrooms to en-suites to communal kitchens, which are a central entertaining and social hub, to small gyp rooms where you can cook and then you need to leave with your food, to fully accessible rooms, to those with spiral stairs leading to a loft space. So trying to find a one size fits all in an old historic college is fairly problematic. So we need to manage expectations as well as continuing to invest in our facilities. Across our portfolio, there's the usual character as you'd expect: single glazed windows, fireplaces that you can't use, that look romantic but are often a little bit fresh, shall we say, in the winter, as well as old pipework and boiler systems that we're constantly investing in. There's the communal kitchens that I've referred to already. I'm sure this photo was taken before the students arrived. I've never seen one this clean, but you get the general gist of what some facilities are like, with the obligatory individual storage as you'd expect. The HMOs, which Andrew referred to, so like many colleges, we have a lot of accommodation on site. We also have a decent portfolio off-site in neighbouring streets. This gives you a bit of a flavour as to the size and scale and the fit out that's fairly common. And this, believe it or not, it's a shared bathroom. Again, I think the cleaners have just been in, but when we think of shared bathrooms in student digs, we probably don't picture something like this. Rest assured, in our circa 800 bedrooms, they're not all as pristine as this. But this is an example of the standards that students are expecting. So there's huge pressure on the colleges to continually invest, but also to invest in them well. We can't afford to do lots and lots of refurbishments. We need to do them well and make them last. So that's certainly something that we focus on in quite a bit of detail, because the lost income and the disruption, if you have to take houses and properties out, is certainly problematic, which I'm sure will come as no surprise. So diving into the pre-pandemic student relationship, having been involved in a few projects and worked with quite a few architects over the years, we often talk about the relationships, the dynamic between the building and those that occupy it. Before the pandemic, our students, naturally, they sleep, they shower, but something that not everyone will pick up on, I guess, is the bedroom is one of what we would call 5 study zones. The amount of time students spend in their bedroom pre-pandemic, it would come and go, because the library, the cafe, the study rooms and the outdoors were often chosen as a more favourable study environment. Why not grab a blanket or a beanbag and sit out in the grass? Why would you not do that as opposed to staying in your room? Of course, the student bedrooms are also similar to a walk-in washing basket. I'm sure those that have teenage kids will appreciate that, but that is very much the life of a student. So I'm sure some of us as parents out there can relate to that. But I guess in summary, the students pre-pandemic could come and go, and a lot of them wouldn't use the bedroom, as a primary point of study. However, post-pandemic, what will change? What has changed? We believe students will spend more time in their household, no question, including their bedrooms and shared spaces, but particularly the bedrooms. And so the two previous presentations are quite interesting with regards to the social spaces, the kitchen ratios, how many might use it, and of course the behaviour between postgrads and undergrads is a little bit different as well. But just trying to understand how they'll interact is really quite important, because reducing time in social areas such as libraries and cafes, it will put more onus on that household to connect and to support one another. Bringing friends into and housemates into bedrooms will continue, regardless of what risk assessments we write and what signage we put on front doors. People will have friends around to stay over, as well as to study. So again, creating a safe environment as best we can is something that's going to be an ongoing focus for the foreseeable. I noted earlier that the statistics, the demand for en-suites, I believe they will continue to increase. I think there's an increasing pressure from the student body on things like sustainability and how do we reduce our impact. En-suites, typically people will spend longer in the shower because it's their shower. So there will be those that are driven by environmental initiatives, but I think fundamentally personal health and hygiene will win out in the day. So having an increased number of en-suites we certainly think is the direction that's heading. And I think bigger rooms, white goods capacity, laundry facilities, I think there'll be more and more demands to create what's perceived as a safer environment. So having a HMO with 6, 8, 10 bedrooms and having their own private laundry facilities versus being on premise where there's shared laundry facilities serving multiple households. I can see there being a shift towards having more laundries of a smaller size, catering for specific households is probably where that's likely to go. In addition, in terms of the relationship, what we're expecting is students want to try and tailor how the room looks and feels, so it's personalised. So it's interesting, some of the earlier images, there are some very successful rooms that look fantastic that are very fixed, and then others that are much more mobile, which allows students to move things around. And that might just be with the seasons, it might be to maximise natural light, it might be the neighbour through the wall snores. So there's all those kind of things where I think students, we believe they're going to want to personalise them, especially if they're spending more time in the room. So having scope to move furniture around, that then ties in with the design and configuration of things like power and lighting, as you can imagine. Furniture, there's furniture and there's furniture. And I think it's, you know, quality is going to be key because they're going to have to work harder. People will spend more time in them. They will sit on them in ways they're not designed to be sat on. They'll lie on things the way that were never designed to be. So I think having furniture that's robust, that can move and be moved, will be key. Unsurprisingly, IT. If we are doing more and more lectures online, people are streaming, there's much greater use of video. The IT infrastructure is just it's a no-brainer. It's got to be absolutely bang on. So I don't think there's any real surprises there. But I think the pandemic will increase the expectations. This next one's an interesting one, air handling. A lot of our air handling is you open the window, you close the window, but there may well be an increase in demand for air to be filtered, to be cleaned, to be treated. So that's something that I've just started to see the first few questions coming through from our student body is how does the air handling work? What's the design look like? So that's something that I'd have on the radar for those that are on the session today that are in design. High levels of natural light and fresh air. So I think, again, natural light is really important, and getting decent access to it when you've got very old buildings can be somewhat problematic. And then finally, this is a really interesting one, which we're working through as a college at the moment, with regards to security systems. Without diving into the politics, track and trace hasn't been a tremendous success. And what responsibilities do colleges have with regards to knowing the movements of their residents without capturing data that they don't need, and without being seen as big brother? There's an interesting dilemma there, and I think socially and morally, I know we're in for some discussions here with our student body, but it is certainly something that is worth keeping an eye on. I think moving forward. Future-proofing continued, easy access to the outdoors, and I think Andrew's comment about leaving money in the budget for the outdoors is a very good one. And I think for those that are blessed with space, the students need to find a way to keep on the grass as opposed to Cambridge, where we're always told to keep off it. I think finding that balance, that blend of being able to get access to sun, to shade, to natural light and fresh air, I think will be important. Although I note the rain has stopped, it's been teeming down. So having that right balance of outdoor space that's undercover and social, I can see that being an increasing importance in terms of the way our outdoor space connects with our indoor spaces. Internal finishes, yes, easy to clean. Getting students to clean, that's a challenge. There's a Nobel Prize out there for someone, I'm sure, if we can try and teach our student population to clean more. But equally, things like allergen friendly, what materials are we using? I think is something that we're increasingly seeing comments about. And it can be expensive to retrofit, so there may be merit in thinking about that from day one. And then finally, I guess, creating robust and functional and attractive student accommodation that's commercially appealing. I mentioned earlier about the need for the furniture to work harder. To continue to invest, the colleges need to increase the occupancy, and so creating bedrooms that are attractive to sell for residential conference and events outside of term time is is something that's going to be, you know, increasingly important. And it doesn't always sit comfortably with the academic community, but it's certainly where I think most people will acknowledge the education sector and funding. Colleges will need to generate more of their own income, and if the bedrooms aren't appealing, if they are shared bathrooms, it's a bit of a hard sell. So that's something that we're certainly very, very mindful of. In terms of coping with the pandemic, I think living in harmony while minimising the risk of infecting one another, it is a difficult beast. We've got properties ranging from 1-bedroom studios through to about 16-bedroom households, and that household that is only as safe as the least committed person in that household. So coming up with designs that are intuitive to the way that you live in them, to the way that you enjoy them, and thinking carefully about circulation and communal spaces, I think is key. And that's the challenge for the design teams that are out there, putting thought into it. But as a college, we can't force people to behave in a certain way. So we need a design to be intuitive and make it easy to do the right thing, make it easy to keep it clean and hygienic, while still providing an environment that's safe. And this one's just an interesting one. This is a new build, so Cowan Court at Churchill College. So it's quite an interesting one where they've got larger beds, which are attractive from a commercial point of view, big seats in the windows to capitalise on the natural light and the fresh air, furniture that can be rearranged, and a nice simple palette, as well as being ensuite. So yeah, I'm not saying that it's the pin-up, but it's certainly an interesting example of a relative new build in Cambridge that I think, from all accounts, about 3 years in now, is performing pretty well. And that is the conclusion of my my presentation. So I think it's now back to you, Simon, for a bit of Q&A.
Thank you, Stuart. Very interesting to hear about some of the challenges that you will be facing, and then the idea of having to lock down a student house or something like that hadn't occurred to me before, but actually I think is one of those things that we all will start to have to think about going forward. Anyway, so again, thank you very much, all of you. We've got some questions that have come in, and we had a couple of questions before via post, if that's the right way of saying it, via email. So why don't I start off with some easy ones to get the flow going first. So perhaps a question here for Andrew Percival. Do you think PBSA can rely on wireless Wi-Fi, or is hardwiring still an absolute requirement? I guess that's about experience. Do you have Wi-Fi problems in some of your many rooms that you have, and what's the feedback from students, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, Wi-Fi is, they can live without most things, but they can't live without Wi-Fi, is fair to say. So, or connectivity, let's put it that way. And I think people expect ubiquitous Wi-Fi, especially if it's on campus, the ability to walk out their room and straight to the library, etc., without a sort of breaking coverage. So I think Wi-Fi is still the standard to work to at the moment. Clearly 5G is coming along. Issues that we need to consider all the time are the build and the impact that has on coverage. We are still largely putting in at least one hardwired point to each room. It used to be 2, we're down to 1. It does then provide resilience, which I think is the important thing, because as I said, especially in the post-COVID world, with more people streaming lectures and everything else, that bandwidth, that ability to ensure effective study is important. Clearly, those elements are significantly the downloading of lectures is less than most people spend on gaming. So if you can build the capacity for gaming, then chances are you can cope with everything else. So you normally find out in the evenings when people are gaming rather than necessarily during the day with streaming of lectures.
Super, thank you very much. Another question here, perhaps this one for Stuart. It's about charging students in terms of charging for the actual energy and water consumption per room. Is that likely to become the norm in the future?
That's a good question. That's one we've been talking about here, actually. And one of our challenges for us as a college is we have a lot of old properties where the internal metering is very, very poor. So our ability to track that is nigh on impossible in some buildings unless we spend significant sums on our infrastructure. Having said that, I'm not suggesting that we must or that we will. quite the opposite, actually. We were having conversations around how can we encourage our student body to behave and interact in a more sustainable way. And if we did have good metering, we could say to our students when they move in, last year's cohort, this was their bills. If you can consume less than them, let's talk about having a rebate. Now, a few of my colleagues had a bit of a heart attack when I discussed that, but I said, look, I do think we have to think a little bit differently about sustainability. So I think to go to a new build or a major refurbishment, I would be, from a bursarial hat on, I would love to have fantastic metering so that we could, you know, try and forecast and incentivize. That to me would be great. But trying to retrofit that into the tens of thousands of bedrooms in Cambridge is somewhat problematic. But if I was building new, absolutely, I'd like to see the metering in there. How it's used, I'd probably have a few committee meetings to get through to get to that point of charging individually.
Very, very interesting. Some inventive ways there of perhaps incentivizing students, money being one of them, obviously the main. Thank you, Stuart. So let's try a question here for Andrew Drummond. So this is one on well-being and mental health. I mean, Andrew, your talk had some thought-provoking ideas and challenges to the norm. Someone here is suggesting that there might be a benefit to actually reintroducing shared facilities in terms of bathrooms, in particular getting away from the ensuite, the idea of an ensuite allowing someone to spend too much time in their room, and perhaps that being leading to feelings of isolation. But also, again, the potential financial carrot, which is perhaps rooms will be cheaper if we don't build with ensuite. So I guess, Andrew, my question, Andrew Drummond, to you is, do you see anything in your research that is showing a move away from the ensuite, or what do you think?
Yes. Yes, but it's difficult. The accommodation we're currently building at Warwick, these 6-bed houses, going back 6 years to when we did the original student surveys and student needs, the questions were asked in quite specific ways and in different ways. So if you ask the student, do you want an ensuite or don't you, they'll say yes. If you ask the question and associate it with a rental level, a lot of them are saying, no, I'll save the rent, I'll pay less rent. And with this, you know, we're trying to build 4- and 6-bedroom houses. So this ability that students could come back on campus and live with their friends. You know, we're doing it because the alternative was to live in a big shared house in Coventry or Leamington Spa. And they didn't have 6 bathrooms for 6 bedrooms. So they were quite happy and quite used to sharing that accommodation. And the residences team who manage all the accommodation are quite happy to build that accommodation and charge the lower rent. Where it comes from short is, whilst we were building stuff that was going to be laced for 50, 52-week lets, the idea of future-proofing it for, you know, well, what if conference did want to come in there and use it? And actually it was the conference market that was driving the en-suites in. So we are building 100% en-suites. But that's not in response to what the students wanted, or and that's for a client who has 6,000 rooms, which I guess probably 4,000 are ensuite, 2,000 is just older accommodation with shared bath. So I think there is a place in the market. It's just, you know, the providers maybe getting their head around the sort of business plan side of it. I think people like NIDO are doing kind of, and in the collective, there's 2 people will share 1 bathroom. So there's a sort of scale thing, maybe. There's maybe an in-between.
I think the other thing to, from our perspective as doing the design, build, finance and operate, so the whole model in one, is whilst the build costs are cheaper, the operational costs are more expensive, because you have to provide cleaning on a regular basis to the shared facility, which you wouldn't do to the ensuite. So you always have to balance up the operational costs along with the construction costs, just something to
Interesting. I think having said that, in Cambridge and Oxford, I think the cleaning and even the bed making and washing is a little bit more what's the word? Yes, generous, I think. Anyway, let's move on. So a question here, I think, for Andrew Percival. So this is an interesting one. This could be getting quite political. So if you want to sort of try and circumvent this this question, please do feel free, Andrew Percival. But it's about relationships breaking down with China. That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, this is ultimately going towards, is there a potential risk of a surplus of student accommodation? I think that's not really necessarily aimed at China. I think that's just generally with foreign students and the cost of studying in the UK. Andrew, do any of your models see a risk of surplus of student accommodation in the future?
I mean, I think it's interesting the way in which the UK government has responded to COVID and to China. We've remained positive as a country towards trying to encourage students from overseas to attend, which is slightly different to other overseas marketplaces which have formally closed their borders to overseas students. So I think it's more of a financial impact on institutions generally. They're heavily reliant for the uplift in fees on overseas students who pay more than domestic students. So quite a few universities will be feeling a pinch from the potential shortfall in international students this year if people decide not to travel. I think also a lot of the product, especially in London, the high-end product has been targeted at overseas students, so we may well see some of that product having short-term issues. The real question is, ultimately, is this a short-term blip or a long-term issue? If it's a short-term blip, most companies will be able to survive relatively comfortably, I would assume, around that basis. But it is going to have some impact on next term, and we won't know until people actually turn up. And as we know, the overseas market is very late in terms of actually confirming its attendance. So yes, we will see problems. There is a dependence on the overseas marketplace, not just from the accommodation, but also from the universities themselves.
Interesting, very interesting. Thank you, Andrew. So look, we've got 2 minutes left. There's lots of questions coming through. I mean, there's one even quite technical one about, and actually very pertinent question about the focus on air systems in terms of, you know, ventilation, mechanical systems in student rooms, and blimey, does that create an issue for operators, you know? But I don't think we can get into that today. But I do thank all of our CFCI members for attending today, and thank you for raising your questions. I'm sorry we can't answer them all in the time we've got, but it falls to me just to give a few parish notices and give a vote of thanks. So parish notices first. We do have an ongoing programme, I'm pleased to say, of webinars by the CFCI. I think the next one is week commencing the 7th of September, one on landscape. Before then, we are trying to get Urban Splash in to talk about their new Northstowe development, but let's see if we get them to come in. So after landscape, 2 weeks after that, on the 21st of September, we've got a virtual site visit to St Columba Church. And then after that, we've got a webinar on the 28th, week commencing the 28th, on modular construction. So a really, really busy calendar of events coming up at the CFCI. So please do join us. And thank you all for coming along today. And lastly, it falls to me to say thank you to our speakers, Andrew Percival, Andrew Drummond and Stuart Websdale. Some very, very interesting and thought-provoking comments there, and ideas of perhaps what the future really is of student housing in the UK. So thank you very much, everybody. I've enjoyed our webinar today. I hope you have too, and see you all soon. Goodbye.